good to go. So
Great. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. And it was great to see you, Jim, and see the new facility out in Cali. And I do love being in Cali. So thank you for inviting me and for the group that attended. I'll actually touch on it a little bit during our today's lecture because there was some interesting things that came about, and just the fact of doing a hands-on course in ceramics in this day and age when the whole world is only talking about how much monolithic and things we could do. So it was actually interesting, and I'll touch on that throughout the lecture a little today. Another great topic. It's funny because the course that we just did was very much about this. So I kind of pulled a lot of the stuff from that course into this and spruced it up a little bit, because what we really did was talk about monolithic, micro-layered, and layered materials and how to use them and when to use them. So it was kind of an intense 2 days and a great group of people that came. I'm going to focus on the background interference or influence in general of how we do that. And most of that comes down to the canvas concept, which I'll go through with you guys. I feel like I've taught it a billion times, but I'll break it down hopefully a little different today. Also, while I was out in Cali, Jim and I spoke about the 2026 schedule. And Jim's been picking a lot of the topics for the last year or two, a few years. And I've lazily not been picking them as well as I should. I kind of found it a fun challenge, but we thought after we talked a little bit that as we set the calendar up, that we kind of throw a few parts of the information out to you guys in the audience and let you kind of help us pick through. So here's what I did, just so you know. We normally do about 12 in the year. I'm planning on at least 3 to 4 of them to be with some special guests. And I have 2 or 3 very special guests lined up already for next year. So my clinical partners, dentists that I work and lecture with, at least 3 of them, if not 4 of them, will be kind of team events. So that's kind of takes away a few. After that, it leaves us 8 or 9, and that'll be an even 12 for the year. I've already come up with about a few that I think are important. So the first one for me for next year is going to be managing all on cases, case selection, material, when to do them, when not to do them, and creating more aesthetic outcomes. So that'll definitely be one of the topics for next year. Second topic will be occlusal concepts, both analog and digital. Obviously, in this world of digital and all the influence that we have, doing things more digitally through printing models and photogrammetry and all the processes, I think are going to be really important. So that'll be another one of the topics. Third topic I picked is going to be the aesthetic principles of the dental team. This is something I'm working on in general for next year. This is a real focus on managing patients and having the ability to understand the importance of micro details in the big macro picture of what we're doing. So this is something that I've been kind of working on a lot, and I'll probably show some of this in Chicago next year too. And then the fourth one I picked was monolithic, micro-layered, fully layered, when, where, and why. And I think the course that we just gave this weekend answered that question to me, in the sense that our course basically went up online and sold out in 4 days or 5 days, and people from all over came, and it showed me that there is still a major value in us layering and building ceramics, and it's kind of our job, my job, and VITA's job to offer those options, to teach people to be better and not just kind of fall in the suit that everybody's doing the same thing. So that's our 2026 plan. What I'd like for you guys is to email us. You can email me, you can email Jim, you can email both of us. It leaves 5 or 6 open options. Now, if you guys did any quick math, you'll see that 5 or 6 is probably more than 12. The reason I say that is because if you give us 5, 6, 7 great topics, we're going to do them. So I don't care if in the end we're going to schedule out 12 immediately, but if we have 2 or 3 other topics that are great, I'll gladly add 13, 14, and 15. So the bottom line is we're here for you. I'm here for you to do these. The more information, feedback, and topics you give us, the more I'll try to fill that topic in for us. So I'll leave it to you guys. If you come up with another 4, 5, 6, 7, wherever they are, we'll try to work them out that hopefully are relevant to not only you and your business, but our whole profession. So Hope that's okay with you, Jim, that I'm passing it off to the people a little bit, but I think it'd be nice to hear exactly what they want besides for the 4 that I've already picked and a few clinical combination ones. Okay, so let's get rolling. The background influence, your material options, and understanding the canvas. So I think when I look at a canvas, and I know for most of you that have seen me or worked with me over the years, I've been teaching the canvas for probably 15 years now, and all I've done with it is vary it or try to improve it, try to make better ways to make it more efficient. But in the end, it does kind of come back to the same 3 processes. I'm looking for fluorescence and translucencies and opalescence, and when do I need more opacity and less opacity, and how do I set the stage for what I did. Jim's concept that he gave me was, what are the background interference? Well, I can interpret that a few ways, right? So one, when you talk about a background interference, I'm kind of talking about 2, maybe even 3 different backgrounds, because the canvas itself is technically the background. But for the fun of it and interpreting a little deeper, I could say that there's a few versions of a background. So let me give you a few examples. One, prep shade is a background, right? Because the coloration of the tooth that I'm working on has an influence on my restorative, whether that's through a canvas or through a monolithic crown. That prep shade is going to give me an influence that I have to manage. The second one is going to be substructure. If I'm dealing in veneer world, my substructure is the tooth, right? Or the prep shade is the tooth that I'm dealing with. But the minute I go into restorative, meaning full coverage, lithium disilicate, zirconia, metal ceramics, now I have another item that I have to manage, and that item becomes more challenging for space, coloration, and final restorative aesthetic that I'm looking for. So for me, the 2 different types of backgrounds, besides for a canvas, will be prep shade and substructure. There is kind of a third, and the third is a little wishy-washy to me. In the mouth, you have a dark environment, and that dark environment can also create some challenges, right? How would that be? Too much translucency in the incisal third, that gets accentuated by the black background behind it, and now the light transmission becomes more problematic. So especially in brighter shades, you're in the OM3 world, but we want to create some translucency. You put a little too much in your hand, the OM3 with the little trans looks good. In the mouth with that darker background might make it not as good. So that's an area that I would say is kind of the third type of background that we think about. And also the gingival tissue. Gingival tissue has an influence on our restorative materials. So the gum tissue hangs over our tooth and our structure, and that pinkish hue usually represents either a shadow of pink or gets discolored by the restorative material underneath it. So I'm not sure if it's technically considered background, but I'm going to put it into the background category. So we're going to say prep, substructure, and then the environment that it's in. I think kind of make all 3 of them. Obviously, the prep itself, we deal with a lot of different issues in preps. And it's funny to me because if you take zirconia as a material and we say, you know, doctors would say you should use zirconia because it masks the tooth well. Okay, well, maybe that's true. Maybe it's not. They also say that zirconia today is so translucent and so aesthetic. All right, well, how could it be translucent and aesthetic and still mask the tooth well? And it's really hard and strong, and it doesn't wear the opposing. And you know, we're throwing out a wish list of all the things that we think it does. I would argue that it doesn't do all those things, and it can't really fulfill how we market it. Obviously, the more translucent it is, sometimes the better it looks, but that is dependent on the prep shade behind it. Also, if it is that translucent, there's no way you're masking a dark post or a core. Now, obviously, you guys are probably aware there are several different opacifiers today that you can use inside the zirconia restorations. I'm starting to experiment with a few of them, to be honest with you. Several different companies make them, and I've been testing, you know, how you paint them on in the green state, fire them, and they kind of create a whiter frosting on the inside of the core to do some more masking. How much that affects the outside color, kind of depends. Am I working in 2/3 of a millimeter, or am I working in 1.5 millimeters? The rule of thumb, just so you know, and this works both in full coverage restorations and in veneer world. Once we get past 6/7 of a millimeter, the underlying structure starts to get more and more minimalized, meaning that the thicker the restoration is, the less the substructure has a factor on it. But let's be clear, the average restoration today is somewhere in the 3, 4, 5/10 of a millimeter to about 1.5 millimeters. So you have to be 0.8, 9-ish before the substructure doesn't matter as much as it used to. And that's not always the case, especially in minimally invasive world. So what you see on the screen is, different samples that we've made over the years to test different materials. And when I see things in the mouth, I mean, look at this, white nice abutment, some discoloration here on the lateral, complete dark and gray. And by the way, each of these colors have different influences. And what I mean by that is, if I'm trying to mask a little bit of an ambery, yellowish color, I don't find it that difficult because those colors are a little softer to mask. The minute I get into these grays and browns, we're in trouble. Very difficult to hide those, whether it's substructure or not, because the grays seem to have a different radiancy to them about how they affect light and how light gets absorbed and reflected from them. Where at least with some warmer colors like yellows and ambers, not as bad. I'm not saying they're good to cover. I'm just saying they're easier to cover than the grays and the browns. So for me, that prep shade is kind of the first thing that I look at when I'm working through my cases. And also that prep shade is going to have an influence. If I have a very white prep shade as compared to not so white or a little yellowish or a little darker, I have to be thinking about my influence of material that I'm choosing, how thick that material is going to be, and can I mask some of that? I didn't put a slide in, and I should have. I could tell you that the protocol that we've adapted at the Coit Center and most of my doctors are starting to use today is we're trying to take the burden of the doctor giving us a restoration that has one gold post on number 9 and a normal prep on number 8, and telling us to use a material to mask that and make them look the same. We've kind of reversed that these days. I want the clinical partner to handle that. And what I'd like my clinical partner to do is, if they have a number 8 that's a metal post and number 9 is a good looking tooth, I would rather they prep that metal post back an extra 1/2 of a millimeter and then use an opaque type bonding cement over that post. So they can create the color being very similar to the color that's on the adjacent tooth, then impression and send that to us. So we're getting the masking taken care of on your end more than on our end. And that we're finding works a lot better. I know one of the materials is Panavia, Speed Sem, Reliax, different cements that have masking ability and come in shades that are very opacified. So a much better scenario than kind of throwing all the weight onto the technicians and just having them have to figure out what to do in that environment and that space that we're working with. Next part is going to be the substructure. So when I look at substructures, we have the same problem because every substructure has a different challenge to it. Obviously, metal ceramics are gray. We're opaquing them, but if the opaque thickness or coloration isn't right, metal ceramics tend to look a little lower in value. Lithium disilicate is naturally low in value. So if I'm micro layering or fully layering on lithium disilicate, definitely more of a challenge. It's funny, in the course that we just did this weekend, I did a fully layered, a micro layered, and a monolithic. We never really finished the monolithic. But interesting was, I don't normally build full contour with lithium disilicate ceramics. Why? Because the nature of the materials tend to be a little lower in value, and they work better in smaller spaces. They work better in micro layered spaces, adding enamels and colors than they do using 10, 15 powders and building them. Even in normal ceramics, high fusing, 900C ceramics, VM9 or VM13, the more ceramic I build, the more value I lose. So the goal is to be able to support that the right way more challenging in the lithium disilicate ceramics because they are a little more low in value in nature based on their final firing parameters and the coefficient to go on lithium disilicate material. So whether you're dealing with metal or zirconia or lithium disilicate, the coloration of that material and the thickness of that substructure are going to play a big role in how you manage the aesthetic parameters. Realize that the thinner I make my substructure, the more room I have for layering, right? So that's kind of great. That's kind of why I still love PFM in a lot of ways, right? Because I can make a metal coping at 0.2 of a millimeter and opaque it, and now I got a millimeter 0.2 to layer in, gives me a lot of room. With zirconia, I'm more around 3/4 is probably the thinnest I can go, and that's pushing it because the manufacturer would recommend 4 to 5 tenths, right? So I'm pushing that, but I can't really get thinner than that 3/4. Otherwise, I can cause some coefficient issues because of the thinness and thickness of the ceramics. Works the same in metal ceramics, by the way. And the thicker I get, then the less room I actually have for layering. So I can get thicker and thicker. Yeah, that provides more and more masking, but I also have less and less room now to finalize the ceramic on. So all those factors are playing in my head as I'm looking through the case. And each case that I'm looking through, I might have to choose to say, well, the prep shade is very dark. I know I want to finish with the enamels. Maybe this internal dentin that I was going to use might not be the correct one. If the coloration is a little lighter, well, then maybe I can get away with a certain dentin. So I'm kind of thinking it from two phases. Where am I starting from? What's the opacity of the tooth or the substructure? What's the thickness of the tooth or the substructure? And I want to finish with some sort of a translucency on the outside. What I'm really getting to is what do I want to put in the middle? And what I want to put in the middle might not always be what you think it is. It might not be the normal dentin. It might be a mix of dentin or opacious dentins or a fluorescent dentin. It might have to change that concept a little bit to fit the space that I'm working in. And by the way, I'm going to go into the Corsi stuff from the weekend, I think towards the end, but why I found it so interesting is because every advertisement, every marketing that I see, everything that I see, every lecture that I see is about the technology, the printing, the milling, the monolithic, the this, the that. And it's kind of, I don't want to say dumbing us down because we all make a living doing it. But I was really surprised when we offered a hands-on course that it sold out so quickly, and the people that were there were so interested in being able to add that benefit and understand their powders. And here's why it kind of resonated with me so much. If you weren't a great ceramic builder to start with, okay, you've been doing ceramics for 10 years, you use 3, 4, 5 powders, that's how you learn, you use some opacious dentin, some enamel, and you built crowns and they looked good or they didn't look as good as you'd like, whatever the scenario was, fine. In today's world, it's shifted to micro layering and monolithics. Well, how do you micro layer if you don't understand the values of the powders that you started with 10 years ago? And that's where the crux is for me. That's where it's kind of becomes a real challenge because I can make the argument that we didn't understand our powders well enough when we were using 4, 5, 6, or 15 of them. And we're definitely not going to understand how to use them when you only have 1, 2, 3 that you can use because you're limited in the space that you're working with. So our focus in the course had a lot to do with understanding opacities, opacious materials, and how light works with them into translucencies. And we spent a lot of time kind of going through that. So when I saw the topic for this course last night, I was like, oh, we just did all this, so I can grab a few of the sides and kind of work my way through it. So here's the 2 keys that I want you to think of. Opacity, in general, usually has 2 parameters to it. One, let me back up. Opacity in general, main thing is to stop light from penetrating through it. So if I opaque something, light in theory should not be able to go through it and come out the other side. But the real 2 keys to it are, what is the light doing? Is it getting absorbed into the opacity or is it getting reflected from the opacity? So I want to define opacity as absorbing or reflecting, but in the end, it stops the light from going through it. It doesn't pass through it. And that's really important because we use that in our restorative process to absorb and to reflect where we want to and where we need to. On the other side of the coin is your translucencies. And translucencies allow light to pass through them. They just limit the light with certain amounts of opacity. So yes, in translucency, there are opacified particles. Not lots of them. It depends on how much translucency there is. But let's just take a scale. If opaque is 100% opacified, that means light cannot penetrate through it. Well, translucency is usually 6, 7, 8, 10% opacified. So that means that 95 or 90% of the light actually passes through it, yet some of it gets reflected or blocked or absorbed depending on the particle. So if you think of it from that concept, opacity stops, absorbs and reflects. Translucency absorbs most and has a very small amount of reflective ability depending on the amount of opacity and the type of translucency that you're using. What do I mean by that? A gray translucent obviously absorbs more light, where a white translucent reflects more of the light because it's a whiter material by nature. So those are the things that I kind of looking through, and that's what we spent a lot of time with when we were working through the course this weekend. All of it kind of falls the same for me. Whether you're dealing with 1.2 to 1.5 space, it's always kind of the same process. I need about 1 millimeter of dentin, usually 0.2 to 0.5 tenths of a millimeter of enamel. And the two biggest areas we struggle with are usually the marginal area and the ending of the crown of the substructure or tooth form, where are the two biggest challenges we have in masking and hiding. And the reason those are hard because the light penetration. Light penetrates an area where there is nothing, and I have to figure out a way to make the light reflect back or be absorbed. I have to manipulate that. And that's why I'm using the materials that I'm using. That's why I'm using certain opacities and certain fluorescences, because what I'm trying to do is manipulate how the light hits the tooth and reflects or absorbs from the tooth. And the more I can do that, the better I can create depth in the restoration, but the harder it is with the less space I have. So for me, it's a kind of a simple equation. When I have a case that I'm working on, I'm looking at the case and I'm trying to figure out how much space I have. In veneer, I usually don't have a lot of space, right? I'm usually 3/4 tenths of a millimeter. I mean, look at these veneers. There's barely even a chamfer or shoulder here. It's almost a feather edge finish line. So I don't have a lot of space to deal with there. But I also want to extend the tip. So I'm going to use a little opacious material. I'm going to create my canvas, dentin, value, translucency, some ceramic blue materials or opal translucents, blue grays, whatever that translucency effect I'm looking in my material. And then I'm going to my mammalian materials. I mean, I barely even have any dentin on this tooth because I don't have a lot of room for dentin. But where I am focusing is in the area where I gotta hide the transition between the end of the tooth and the air, where there's space, there's nothing there. And those are going to be about my mammalian. So look at that buildup without any enamel, obviously. You can see that the dentin is very thin. Problem with that is the dentin really doing anything at that thin, or did I modify the dentin? I can tell you I had to modify the dentin, and I'll explain that as to why in the next few slides, because I think it's important that you understand how that works. And then I'm going to go back to my canvas enamels, and I'm just going to cover that area with my mammalian material so I can get more absorption and reflection in the areas that I want to. So here's what I think is kind of crazy for me when I think of it this way. Years ago, manufacturers, and all of them, by the way, I'm not throwing any one of them under the bus, they all kind of did this. They gave us these cheat sheet formulations of how we were supposed to build our ceramic material. And you can see this is pretty old because it says metal there. But let's be honest, if this was zirconia, would it be any different? You'd still do the same thing, right? The goal is that you're supposed to put either an opaque or a liner there if it's zirconia. Then you're supposed to use opaque dentin, then dentin. Now, if you think of that from a common sense point of view, how do I get opaque or liner, opacious dentin, and a hair of enamel there on a feather edge margin? Can't really happen. So the concept of teaching it this way had some flaws to it, yet most people learn from that point of view of how to do it. I make the argument that picking your material isn't about just what the manufacturer told you, A1 dentin, the enamel that goes with it, A1 or A2 opacious dentin. That's not how I want people to think. I want you to think about space, opacity, and translucency. So yes, my average dentin should be about 1 millimeter in thickness. But is it? How often do you actually get to use that millimeter of thickness? And I want you to think of it from this perspective. Once I have 1 millimeter of thickness, I'm going to tell you that that millimeter of dentin is only about 35% opacity. Now I'm giving you a 35% number. Why? Because some of them might be 38 or 40, some of them might actually be 31 or 32. It depends on the ceramic brand that you use. And just to be clear, most of the ceramic manufacturers don't want you to know those numbers. They think it's their priority not to tell you that. I think it's a mistake. I tell people all the time, if you're using VITA A1 1 millimeter dentin, your dentin is probably about 32 to 33% opacified. That's not a lot. If you're in another brand, which is maybe more opacified, maybe getting 36 or 37. And if you're in another brand that's less opacified, maybe getting 29, 30. That means a lot of light is going through your dentin. But remember, that number was based off 1 millimeter in thickness. What happens when I don't have 1 millimeter? The game changes, because now what happens is my dentin is getting thinner, more light can pass through it. So it's no longer 35% opacified. Now it's only 26% opacified. And when I get even thinner, same thing happens. If I cut that in half, I only use about 0.6 of a millimeter. That 35% of opacity is now down to 18, 20%. That means that when I put some dentin on a substructure or a stump shade, a prep shade, 80% of that light is going through if I didn't get the thickness that I needed. And the coloration that I'm getting is from the substructure or the actual prep design itself. So that kind of changes how we look at things. And that was kind of our core that we focused on in the 2-day class that we just did. So here's what opaque looks like. And this is pretty thin, the opaque, but you can see you don't get influence from white, black, and blue. Here is dentin at 0.8 of a millimeter. Look at how bright that looks. Look at how dark that looks, and the blue influence. That's what your substructure or tooth is doing. And here's the one that bothers me the most. That's your opacious dentin. I know everybody grabs their opacious dentin, they put it around the margin, they say, oh, I'll put opacious dentin there. Problem is that opacious dentin is 0.2, 0.3 of a millimeter, and it's pretty much translucent at that point. So it's really not doing anything for you. During the course, we went through a few sequences of how we could fix that. But the game is the same. How do I manage this area right here? And how do I manage this area right here? So I'm always trying to do that. Your job is to understand the powders. What is the opacity of the opacious dentins compared to the base dentins or transplant materials that you're using? And if you start thinking that way, rather than just the doctor asked for A1, I took the A1 dentin and I used the enamel that goes with it. Why do I not have a perfect A1? Because you don't have a perfect space and formulation for that to work all the time, especially in today's minimally invasive microlayer kind of a world. So I want you to think through each of these materials, know their strengths and weaknesses. The way I've always presented it over the years is I think of it as a chess game. I'm not a good chess player. I admire the game. I think it's nice to make people think and the concepts of it. But the key to being a good chess player is really understanding the board that you're working on and the power of each piece, because each piece can do different things. And those pieces together can win the battle that you're fighting. No different in ceramic. See, the goal for me with ceramic is to actually think of my ceramic as chess players. And some of them are kind of not as important as maybe other ones might be. Some of them have the ability to take different turns and have different strength factors and different opacities and translucencies to them. So what I really want you to think of is your players in the game that you're playing, they have to be useful for you to achieve the game that you're trying to achieve. And for me, most of that starts with opacity on the inside and translucency towards the outside. And what you're going to fill in the middle areas has to be about your knowledge and how you manage through the process of using that. So let's take a veneer case as an example. I'm looking at a veneer case, and I won't walk you through all the boring details of it, but you can see the prep shades are obviously going to be much darker on the 8 and 9. Patient also had a diastema, so we have to shift some teeth around and make that a little more complicated. And when I look at the preparations compared to where I want my wax up to be, I think you can notice right away some little challenges that are going to be present for us. My central is kind of ending here, but the prep is kind of ending there. So I can either have the doctor re-prep that, or I have to figure out how to shift and kind of change the angulations on the laterals. Also, I have a solid structure here. Remember, this is probably a little darker than that one. I have length that I have to fill, and then I have the diastema that I have to fill. So think about all those things. I need some opacity. I need some translucency. I might even need a little fluorescence here and there, depending, because I'm not getting any fluorescence in this area because it's only going to be material. Obviously, I'll get fluorescence from nature on the tooth, but there's no nature here. I have to fill that space. So I have to be thinking of my opacities and the translucencies. In veneer design, the average enamel, and so we don't mix up these numbers, when we're building ceramics, enamel for us is 0.2 to 0.5 millimeters in thickness. In nature, the actual enamel can be anywhere from 0.4 to about 1.2 millimeters in thickness. Why is that critical? Because when the doctors are prepping the teeth, they want to stay in enamel as much as they can. Once they start prepping past 2, 3, 4, or 5/10 of a millimeter at the cervical, they're indenting or cementing. So they don't get the same bond that they would get. In the middle third, I have almost a millimeter. And then towards the incisal, I have a definite millimeter, if not more. So that allows the freedom for them to be able to bond, but it starts to limit us in how much material we can have, in the veneer world. So I kind of think of my veneers this way. Do I have 2/10 or 4/10? And how much more do I have as I go up? And in truth, when I'm working with veneers with minimally invasive, my material selection is much more critical because I want to use some dentins to get a little bit of masking if the prep shade is dark, but I also need a good amount of translucency to make the light transmission work into the natural dentition. So it's kind of a little bit of a tough edge for us because we have to be able to figure our way through that and understand how to build that and build that process. So as I do that, you can see where my teeth have kind of filled in the space. And I think you can kind of see where I want to get this color influence here. I want to pick up my values here, but I need to still not have direct light transmission in these areas. I need to kind of manage those areas with fluorescence or opacious materials that are going to allow that to look real. Kind of working through that the same way for every case I did. So this was a refractory veneer case. You can see my wash bake, which at this point is really just opacious dentins and some dentins. And then I'll go into filling those spaces, my final dentin buildup, which is about the chroma on the cervical, the value here, and the translucencies and the effects that I'm trying to create towards the end. And then I'm going to filter over that with some enamels and fill up my shape. And look at the light transmission after the enamel is built, right? I mean, this is kind of a cool shot because if you think about that, we go back one, you already know where the teeth are, right? You can see the teeth. So there's teeth under here, but yet when I'm showing this to you from a transmitted light point of view, the light from behind, that's the one I want, right? Look right here. So if you look at this, you can see my prep and kind of get that image in your head of where that prep actually is. Watch what happens when I finish the buildup and I shoot it from behind with a light coming from the back of the arch. Watch where the light transmission goes. there. Do you see the preps? I mean, think about that, how cool that is, right? You don't see that form of prep. You see my opacious materials, you see my translucencies, but you don't see the outline of that prep because I've masked the ability to see that with the material choices that I'm using. And even here, because you wanted a whiter, brighter tooth, you don't see the tooth position. You just see where I want the mamelons and the light reflection to go to. So there is his final case. He wanted a super white, bright case. A story for a different day. The case came nice, but that's kind of the point, is how am I using my material? So I'd say in veneer world it's almost a little bit easier. When we get into the substructure, it's a little more challenging because I'm losing space and my substructures tend to shadow the substructure of the root or the root itself. So what do I mean by that? If I put a metal coping on a tooth, or I put a zirconia coping on a tooth, or even a lithium disilicate coping on a tooth, you're going to notice that the minute I put that substructure on the tooth, look at the darkness that you get in the root. I'm actually creating some shadow over the root. The only way to get away from that is by taking the substructure away, by not having substructure here and using ceramic materials. What is that for me? You guys all know already. It's fluorescent margin materials. For me, all my restorations, zirconia, metal ceramic, I'm always cutting that margin back, and I'm using fluorescent margin materials here. You guys have heard me say it 8 trillion times already, but I did add to it because I'm not just doing my margin, I'm also creating some value and some heights of contour. And again, we spent a lot of time in the course kind of going through that and really doing it. Everybody built margins and everybody did a pretty great job on them actually, so it was kind of nice. Then I'm going to use my value shifts, meaning if I'm working here, I want to absorb more light. And if I'm working here, I want to reflect more light. So remember, I said that opacity can absorb or reflect, and it has a lot to do with the chroma. So as an example, here I'm using opacified fluorescent material that has high chroma, so I can try to get some absorption in the restoration. Where here, I'm using very whitish, brightish colors because I want my opacity to be more reflective as I'm building. So I'm changing the game. I'm shifting from absorption to reflection in my buildup. And I'm kind of always looking at light that way. And you can see how after I fire that, that's kind of exactly what happens. Look at the chroma that you're seeing there, yet look at the brightness and the value that you're seeing there, and then the lower value area right in here. So just in that little wash bake, I've done 3 zones of value. I've created chroma, value, and age-related translucency that I'm kind of trying to work through. Also in the course, I showed this, which I haven't showed in a while, and this is kind of a fun experiment I did a long time ago. This is where I was building a tooth from the analysis book, page 18. And when you look at that tooth that's on the page on 18, you can see that there's a lot of translucency on that tooth. And I kept trying to figure out how to build this the right way and make it look as real as I could. And in the end, what I realized was I never got enough translucency out of it. So I wound up building up a tooth, and I actually built dentin right just halfway up the tooth, and then a wall of translucency. Now you should see that and think, well, that's just goofy because now you're going to have a translucent line, and that's the thing we try to hide. You're right, but I'm able to hide that. And how did I hide it? By switching materials. I didn't use a dentin here. I used a mamelon material, or I used an effect chroma material. And because those materials are so opacified and some of them have fluorescence in them, this material is going to help me to mask what I don't want you to see. And I'm not going to use it that thick. I'm going to use them fairly thin because I don't have a lot of room. So there's my mamelon material. I put a stain or 2 in just for the fun of it. And then I took a whiter enamel just for the fun of it to make it even a little brighter in that area. And in the end, this is 2 powders over my canvas core that I have here with a few little dots of stain. And you already know enamel should be 2/10 to 5/10 of a millimeter. So I'm going to put enamel just on this one corner of the tooth. This way, when I fire it, you can see the tooth itself, and you can see what the enamel over the tooth looks like. and I'll fire that. So look how I've created that mammalian effect by the use of my materials here. And by the time I put my enamel over it, the transition really works nicely. I have this floaty white color in here, and then I have this surrounding translucency. And that's all done based on 2 or 3 little powders. I didn't use much more than that. So I'm controlling how the light is being absorbed or reflected. And that's kind of the goal that we talk about all the time. And I could do that over and over again, right? With a million different materials and cases. It's not so important. But in the end, it's the thought process of what I'm using, why I'm using it, and how I'm using it to be done. After I'm done with that, I wound up actually thinking now about my enamels. And I said, okay, well, now that I have my core and I've masked this area here, I still want to do the same thing in my enamels. I want some chroma, I want some value, I want some translucencies. So I use this slide, which is an old slide, but it's kind of a cool slide because you can kind of see my build-up. And by the way, this is a pretty antiquated build-up. It's from 15, 20 years ago. But even then, I was starting the same concept. I was trying to build more chroma here. I was probably putting my value powders a little too high up. They're usually more in that middle third. And my mammalian structures were not really great at that time, but it was kind of a work in progress. But the reason I show it is because think of that as my canvas. Now I want to put a shell or a filter over that canvas. So watch what happens. Now I'm going to surround this with my enamels and my translucency. Let me go back one. So you see the basic canvas. Now you see how the shell or filtration of enamel fits in. And when you fire those together, that's where I get the final look and the final part. So again, you can see where that whiter material is here, how it's brighter, how here it's thinner and I get more chroma. And here's my mammalian effect that I'm getting from behind that enamel wall that I've just created on the restoration. So what I did with these teeth, to give you guys an example, is I ground off that little bit of enamel that I put in the corners. And then what I did is I duplicated them. So now I have basically this in refractory dyes. And then I built just the enamel. So 2/10 to 5/10 of a millimeter. So I'm only going to build this portion of the tooth now with enamel. And this becomes really helpful because you're not used to seeing enamel on its own, right? You're not used to seeing dentin on its own. We're kind of used to seeing them together. So I built an ENL, an END, and a mix of different enamels here. And when I divested them, remember, I have 2/10 to about 5/10. And here's what the ENL looks like. I mean, ENL is a pretty whitish enamel. Even at the cervical, it still has a whitish influence on it. So maybe it's not the enamel I want towards the cervical, especially in micro layering, unless I'm trying to boost up that whiteness to it. When I get to the END, or this would be the medium or dark in Lumex, look how translucent that is. And I don't know, do I want all that translucency in this area? I'm not sure, right? It really depends on the case. And look at the segmented ones, right? The segmented ones, you can see I put some chroma here, I didn't put it there, I have whiter here, I have little different types of enamels here. So I took those veneers and I put them back to the original dentin color that we had, just to kind of show you the effect of what happens to them. And it's kind of interesting because remember how this worked, right? This is ENL 2/10 to 5/10. This is END 2/10 to 5/10. And this is a segmented enamel buildup. They all look completely different, yet what's behind them is all exactly the same. They're all the same buildup before. And what if we go to the other one? This was the one that, if you remember, had this straight line of translucency that went through it. Well, if I use straight ENL, I don't see much translucency at all. If I use END, I start to see some of the fingers that I created. And if I use a segmented buildup, I get more chroma, more value, and more translucencies across the board. So choosing those powders is kind of critical to me. Okay, so I mentioned the course in Cali this weekend. I mentioned it because Jim and I decided that we're going to pick, I think, at least 2 more weekends for next year. We haven't locked the dates in yet. It'll probably be in May, June, and then again, maybe, towards August, September or something. We'll pick 2 good dates. We'll get those locked in. We only take 12 people in the course. So, like I said, this one sold out pretty quickly, and it was so nice to see some friendly faces there, people that I usually worked with and known for a lot of years. So thank you guys for attending. And in that course, we actually covered exactly what the topic was today, the canvas, right? And the canvas is all about creating chroma, creating value, and creating effect in it. And those are all the areas that we covered in the course, plus more. We also went through a lot about managing the face and looking through tooth positions and angulations and tension spots and facial features. So we kind of did a little of everything in the course. And I think most of us, I did my crowns in one bake. I was a little low in value on my central. When I was done, I used a pink translucent because it was on my table and I was too lazy to go pick another one. And everybody else got the margins done and at least one bake. Some people did a few enamels on it too. But again, I'm not the person who cares about it if you go home with a pretty crown. I care you go home with knowledge. So putting that all together, here's kind of what we did, right? We looked at patients' faces. We actually went into tooth positions and what we wanted to change and where we thought teeth should be. We even talked about occlusal concepts and enamel wear and other things. It was a pretty comprehensive course. In truth, Jim, maybe they should be 3-day courses, might even be better. We went through some digital model work and we talked about some digital sequences and how we're doing that and where I'm going digitally. One of the things that I showed for the first time, besides for how I'm designing teeth, kind of digitally sometimes, is some of the newer things we're doing, like digital face bow transfers. So we're actually using a digital face bow now, and we're being able to mount our models straight to the articulator rather than having to use plaster and stone and make these big articulations anymore. So in the end, this is how my models are getting mounted to an articulator. And Social here is working with me and Jen are really working on this. And we even bought a different printer to start printing the models together. So a bigger table now. But this is really nice. It's coming out of their printer and I'm managing occlusion and all this stuff right at the same spot. And we even made our own custom little platforms to kind of make our models print to. So those are still in development, but they're getting there. So from there, we did our diagnostic wax up, all the things that we would normally do. Went through the case about where we'd like the teeth to be. We decided we were going to raise the gingiva. We raised the gingiva up on this case with a little bit of a crown lengthening. And I was able to provide the guide for that for the doctor. And then from there, we basically went through to the final restoration. So the patient becomes provisionalized. And then after the provisionalization, everything goes back to ceramic and what materials we're going to use. So clean impression, as always. Again, a physical impression. I don't do veneers on digital models. We only want them on physical impressions for many reasons. Provisionals are done, and I'm going to start my canvas just like I would with any other case. In this case, we actually mixed two materials. Sorry, shut that down. I did feldspathic veneers on the anterior 6, and I did lithium disilicate, mostly monolithic, in the posterior. Those were to do vonlays, facials, and occlusions, okay? So the canvas you can see is the same that I always do. I'm creating some chroma, I'm creating some value, and I'm going to create my translucency in this area. And then I'm going to go back to the mamelons, and I'm going to use some mamelon materials and maybe some opal materials around the sides. And then this patient wanted a very white, bright, kind of not very much translucency. So again, a very white, bright, kind of a straightforward look, and final restoration. So, and I tied in feldspathic veneers with lithium disilicate, and it all kind of worked out pretty well. So that's what we covered comprehensively those 2 days. I hope I hit my mark with Jim's canvas and the backgrounds that he talked about today. And I think we're just about on time, so I'll stop there. Yes, good timing. And say thank you guys for joining the webinar. Thank you folks who were in the hands-on course. And thank you, Jim, for the hospitality while I was there. Everything was great. And I look forward to being back. We have one more lecture for this year in December. And like I said to you guys before, we're organizing next year. So you guys have the options, pick 4, 5, 6, 7 topics. I will try to fill them and we'll work out. Jim will help us work out the dates. Thank you. Jim, thank you. It's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Peter. That was, hit the spot, I think, for the canvas and the background interference. So Thank you again very much. For everyone, go ahead and send us any questions, last minute questions you have, or some suggestions for some future webinars, as Peter mentioned earlier. CE, those of you that are asking about CE, will go ahead and process your information that you submitted for this webinar, and we will submit those to the corresponding CE brokers or NBC or wherever you may be in a timely manner. We did record this webinar. It will be posted on our VITA North America YouTube channel, so please visit us. If you need to look into any of our reps, please go ahead and contact one of us. Please remember that we will be having additional 2026 webinars and a couple workshops, as Peter mentioned. We do have the next, Peter Peavy is actually going to speak again December 18th on topography, which is always a good topic. We get a lot of calls on how do you make this texture, how do you make that texture, and so forth. So that'll be a very interesting webinar for all of you to watch. I would like to remind you, though, please email Peter or myself, as he mentioned earlier in the program, some webinar topics that you'd like to see, because we're pretty open, and all we want to do is educate you so that we can get you to reach for more, reach for things you haven't done, give you some out of the box thinking. Peter's from digital to traditional does a tremendous job, as you can see today, on how to explain all these specialized nuance laboratory techniques. So please let us know what we can do to help you out with. Peter has always been gracious enough to show us, to provide you with his contact information. He does travel extensively, and he's got a working laboratory as well, and trying to manage that at the same time. So if you email him and he doesn't get back to you, or you call him and give him some time to get back to you, and I'm sure he will. Otherwise, you can get a hold of us here as well at the company. So looking at questions, let me get those up here, and I have to wear my glasses to do this. All right, do you seal your veneers first, your guys?
Yeah, it's funny. So when I used to use the older refractory materials, the GC material, I did use a paste on them. Now that I've switched to the Shera material, which I was getting from Europe, I think they have a distribution here in the States now. I'm not sealing them as much. The Shera material is really nice. It works pretty well. But I will tell you, depending on the coefficiency of ceramic you use, sometimes a little seal doesn't hurt, and you could do that with a connector paste. A few companies make that, or you could just do it with a micro layer of like a glazing paste and glazing liquid to kind of seal and fire higher. It really depends on the coefficiency of your ceramic. I do find that the zirconia and lithium disilicate ceramics on refractories tend to want to pull a little bit more, so I would recommend a connector paste for those. The metal ceramics, the M13 and others seem to kind of grab on a little bit better, and I think that's just a coefficiency issue. And one more thing on that, we actually milled our first refractory die recently. So Social printed a digital model, and then instead of printing a digital die, she milled a refractory die. It's actually a refractory puck. It didn't work out perfect for the first one, but we're working on it.
And you would still process that same way, put it in the oven to extract all the chemicals?
That's not the beauty of it, because the refractory is in a puck. It's all done for you. Everything is done. Once the die is milled and it goes in the model, you can go straight to building on it.
Nice. That'll save some time. Has your brush been made for sale yet?
They were forever. You can still get some of them probably with MPF, I'm sorry. I am working on a new one, but no, it's not out yet, and it won't be probably it's really hard with the brushes. I would love to just make another one tomorrow, but getting the hair and everything is so difficult these days with everything going on in the world. So hopefully by Chicago next year. If not, MTF makes my old original brushes, and Harvest does make the fusion brush, which I had a little involvement in too.
And kind of a related question to brushes. When you're placing like mamelons or very intricate, detailed work, what size brush do you use? Do you use a natural hair? Do you use a hybrid or a synthetic?
Yeah. Really, the key isn't the type of brush or the size of it. That's really up to you and your comfort level, right? When I started, I used the big brush. It's not a big brush, and now I'm down to a 4 or a 6 that I use every day. But when I'm building mamelon materials, what I am doing using is a smaller brush, sometimes a 2 or even a 1. The trick is I'm not using that brush in water. I'm using it in glazing medium because I'm mixing my mamelon materials with glazing mediums. I don't want to take a water-enriched brush and pick up the mamelon materials with it. I want to take a smaller or stiffer brush, and to make it stiffer, I'm dipping it in glazing medium and then picking up my ceramics with it. So I'm kind of separating the two. All water buildup across the board, but when I get into mamelons and fine details, it's kind of a glazing medium buildup.
All right, thank you. And those are other tips that Peter shared with the workshop this past weekend. So thank you very much for that. You mentioned the color masking, the colorant earlier in your presentation. What thickness is the most effective? Is there a thinness that you say, hey, I need that? Or
I don't know that. So if you're asking about the colorant, are they asking about the colorant that we're putting inside the zirconia, or the ability of zirconia to mask at thickness?
The thickness of the zirconia. At one point.
Yeah, so thickness of the zirconia, if you're anything under 6 to 5/10 of a millimeter, with the newer zirconias, you're fairly translucent. And if you don't believe me, then just take a dye, put black magic marker on it, take your 5/10 of a millimeter coping, fill it with glazing medium, and put it on the dye. And you'll be shocked how much darkness you see come through that. So 5/6 of a millimeter, you're getting a good amount of light coming through. It's not till, with the newer zirconias, that is, right? Because all the newer zirconias are really going in the more translucent direction. Even a millimeter in thickness, you're going to get influence from a black, dark prep shade underneath. So that's why I've kind of started shifting a little bit more towards trying out some of the opacifiers that we paint into the zirconias in green state and seeing what they can and can't do.
All right. Another question: is there ever a case in which you place a more translucent material behind a more opacified material?
Yeah, so actually a lot of cases I would do that. So the basic concept is I want opacity to translucency, but some teeth that I look at don't have a lot of translucency on the outside, or some of them have a lot more translucent floating inside and then kind of have a whiter, frosty, more reflective outside. Patient bleached, just the enamel themselves, whatever that is. So yeah, a lot of times I'll use a dentin, like a halo material mixed with, dentin mixed with enamel as a final for my restoration, especially when it's thinner restorative, meaning I'm only working in 6, 7, 8/10 of a millimeter. I don't mind that little frosting of opacity towards the outside because it just helps me manage the light getting in a little bit more.
All right. Interproximals, do you use more of a translucent material, or?
No, so interproximal, I'm almost always more opacified materials because I don't want the light to transmit through there and create that black shadow. But that opacious material goes to a certain point, and then the last 2, 3/10 of a millimeter will be translucency.
All right, another like a zirconia framework, bleach shade, but I get a kind of a blue hue to it. Do you think it's too much translucency powder?
Yeah, so I don't know if you mean you're getting your blue hue from the frame itself or from the final. If you're getting it from the frame itself, then you're definitely too translucent, and the effect of whatever's underneath it could be affecting it, or your sintering could be off. You could be over sintering and creating more of a glass-like structure in it. Usually the blue grays I find way more prevalent in lithium disilicate materials because it's the nature of the material. They tend to have that blue or gray look. In zirconia, you shouldn't be seeing it. And if you could send me a picture and show me, maybe I could help walk you through it a little bit, but you shouldn't be seeing blue gray in zirconia for sure.
All right. Well, Peter, thank you very much. I think fantastic presentation again, as always, and you took care of all the questions. Anything last minute words you'd want to part with the audience?
No, just a thank you to the group and friends who showed up in Cali. Look forward to seeing you guys again. Thank you, Jim, for the hospitality and the facility and everything you did for everybody and getting everybody organized. Look forward to adding some dates next year, and don't forget to send us some topics and titles for 2026. I know the calendar is filling up for us pretty quick, so Jim and I are going to work on some dates. I think I have a lot of travel between January and April already, but we look forward to kind of locking a few dates in and hopefully seeing everybody here or there next month or next year. So thank you guys all for coming.
Yes, and for certain you'll be there in Chicago,
Yep.
LMP Chicago. So we look forward to that, all those presentations there. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. And as Peter mentioned, if you have some suggestions on some topics, please don't hesitate to send them to us. We'd like to create some of your suggestions, turn them into reality for webinars, and you can be as specific as you can be on what you're really looking forward to have Peter go over. That would be very helpful. And I want to thank Peter again for joining us today. And it was really great as always. And I want to thank everybody for joining us wherever you may be. So this will end today's VITA Academy webinar for today. Thank you for joining us.